Hey guys, Thomas the Jr. here, aka Mustached. I'm here to review Anonymous 616. So I'm gonna apologize in advance for being a little bit sick here. You can probably hear it in my voice, probably. And just feeling a bit stuffy up here, but that's okay. Anyways, this movie starts off with a bunch of dead bodies, and one man manages to get up with a knife on his back. And he sees all these dead people. He checks in on Monica, who has a brief moment of life after dying. He calls the cops uh, and tries to, remember what essentially happened. So the rest of the movie, he gets a really brief flashback of the night prior, or I guess earlier in the day when these four met up. And essentially them just hanging out. So it's himself being Jason, Monica, Jenna, Jason's girlfriend, and Eric. So they decide that they're gonna have a little cheers, have a little celebration of a reunion, since this Jason guy got back from another war. So he tells the story about this guy and his dog, and they talk about life and Eric's change and stuff. He also has a daughter named Emily, which we quickly see that Jason has the hots for her, uh, in a very yes pedophile like sense. Um, so already we are getting a character we're just not rooting for right off of the bat. But she eventually goes away. Uh, and then they start smoking, and they talk more about the different ideologies and how that creates war. And the two, Eric and Monica, mention this drug named DMT. I'm not a drug person, so I don't know what that stands for or what that is. Nonetheless, they all end up taking it, and they start to get visions. And Jason is the one we see. It's all bright and colorful. He vomits later on, and then sneaks in to peek at Emily for a moment. And then he goes into this room that has a laptop in it, which says hello to him. Specifically him. He slowly but surely goes over to the computer, and this anonymous figure claims to know everything about him and wants to be tested about that. So Jason eventually gives in to this and decides to see what this is all about. So it mentions stuff about Jenna and his parents and this preacher's daughter that he was involved with as well. About this guy, I think is Abdal Jahar, I think his name was. And he mentions the stabbing that apparently no one else saw. So of course Jason freaks out and goes away from that. But everyone else seems to have a pleasant enough experience. Eric talks about his experience, and so does Jenna, and so does Monica. They all talk about it as well. Jason claims that he was the one that got it bad, saying that something else happened, though we don't see that. But he does eventually go back to the computer, and he types back to this anonymous figure. And he's trying to figure out what this Anon is all about, and it claims to again be traveling and again visiting the sites and knowing everything. And it wants Jason to be free all of a sudden. So it says that it wants for Jason for 2 minutes to just have Jason do whatever he wants to do. So, out of convenience, Emily visits Jason, and then he starts, like, getting all creepy at her and gets her to take a few pics of her belly button. And then she leaves off again. And Anon eggs him on even further about Eric, and how Eric pushes him over, and how he's potentially with Jason's girl at some point. So he comes back to the room with the other three, I should say, and he cuts off Eric. And then he decides to pick up a nail gun, and he shoots Eric in the hands. And Jenna's freaking out as well, and so does Monica. They're so distraught they don't even bother trying to move. So Jason pins him Eric against the wall. He then proceeds to choke Jenna and strap her down to a chair. And we see that from the beginning of the movie, Jason was a bit bloodied up. We see that came from a little glass shard. Again, Jason's still freaking out, so he's choking out Jenna more and more with the bag, doing it over and over. And this eventually gets Jenna to admit that she did have sex with Eric at least once. So, to return the favor, Jason wants to have a little fun time with Monica. But Eric wants none of that. Jenna's trying to convince him otherwise. But he ties her mouth up and shoots Eric twice in the knees. So Jason makes Monica take off her clothes, and then Emily's not hearing any of this. She's in her room listening to music. Again, I don't know how loud that music must have been to tone out screaming that loud, but anyway, so yeah, he smashes Monica's head with the cigarette glass holder. I'm not sure what the name of that item is, but anyway, she goes unconscious, and then Jason does his thing with her, with the sex that he said he was going to do with her. So he returns to the computer, and Anon promises that Jason can be like God. And this is where the movie starts to take a bizarre turn, as if it wasn't getting bizarre enough. So Jason returns yet again. Eric is yelling at him over and over again. And then he goes to get this little hammer weapon, and then he smashes down on Eric over and over and over again, killing Eric in the process. So he's just going on about Jason afterwards, checking the fridge, taking out a cigar, and then he's talking to Jenna, saying that it wasn't his fault, and how, I believe he, mentioned how it was Monica that started this whole situation. Well, whatever. Anyway. So he's saying, how he wants better potential, how he wants to be more, and then Jenna mentions how more could lead to the opposition, and now he's sort of leaning toward that direction as well. And thus, he goes back to the computer, which Anon says he is proud, or it is proud, and mentions Jenna. So Jason talks to her some more, and then how he wants to lead America, and then ends up like choking her some more, and then ends up killing her. So Anon congrats him for being closer to becoming this god, and mentions a virgin heart, and then brings up Emily. So Jason takes out his knife, he knocks on the door, and then that's where the flashback ends. So he wakes up, so he's already awake, and then, it's present time. He goes towards the door and gets a package in the mail. When he picks it up, he sees for a moment that it's a box of worms, and then he closes it and opens it up again to see that it's a cake. So he's clearly still hallucinating at this point. He goes to the computer to see that it was never actually plugged in to begin with. All the bug stuff was still to set up the computer was still in this box. So this gets him back thinking to a prior situation, to when he first talked to Emily, and how he said that he mentioned how he was on the computer, and then Emily said, and I quote, or I'm going to paraphrase here, you're silly, or something like that, because the computer was never on. Obviously, it never was plugged in. So he decides that in the current timeline, he checks in on Emily to see that she was severely stabbed to death all over the chest. And then it cuts back to him eating some food, and how it shows how Monica still had enough energy to pull out a knife and stab him in the back, which is how he ended up with the knife in the first place, and he fell over and hit his head on the desk. So we cut back to the present time, and he gets a call from Kelly, which is the preacher's daughter. And Jason wants to know about God and the devil, and how they can each potentially have been up to this. I don't know how he came to that conclusion. Sort of the whole everything he knows about you sort of thing. I guess it just led him there. He mentioned some words that he was told by this other guy, and then Jason gets told to check the internet. So he does, and while he's doing that, it does a little montage where he starts moving the bodies, and throughout at some point in the montage, we see that the words mean the devil will get you. So he cleans up his body, he cleans up the house throughout this little montage as much as he possibly can. He gets some new clothes, and he finds a gun that was actually in the house. So as he opens the garage door, getting ready to leave, he is stopped by a new character named Pastor Warren. So Warren, and I'm just gonna say it now, for all intents and purposes, this might as well just be God. Because, it'll just make sense in just a bit. But he asked about what's in the cases, and what happened to the others. And he also mentions how Jason's gonna end up in death row. And Jason's just not buying any of this, by the way. So Warren reads a passage from the Bible that mentions how foolish he was to accept this offer from Anon, that mentions how he could have had everything, because it mentions that in the Bible. But Jason refuses to back down, pulling out a gun on Warren, and he shoots. And Warren tells him to look past him, and he sees all these police. Now, I would suspect that once Jason really shot, that they would have shot him down immediately, but apparently they were still in a waiting pose for whatever reason. So Warren claims that it is over for Jason and that he will get the death sentence, but Jason refuses to do that, so he kills himself instead. So Warren changes to the various victims that Jason had just claimed and then walks off and vanishes into the nothingness. And that was Anonymous 616. So this movie, the acting is pretty subpar, and the shift in from sort of like this sort of mystery anonymous thing going on that had this intrigue kind of shifts into this whole religion thing, which, it kind of just jumps into that, and it feels, at least the way it's executed, is that these two things don't clash very well upon its execution. It just sort of just comes out of nowhere, and yeah, it just sort of feels like a total shift in like what it was starting to go towards, but the whole thing with it being the devil behind the anonymous thing, it just seems a bit weird. Um, you know, Maybe I've seen too many other movies that have a devil or a devil-like figure, and how he usually tends to have a more physical presence in movies. Maybe that's just me. Um, God, not as much, obviously, but in this movie, he does take a more physical form, or I guess a non-physical form, since he was not visible. But nonetheless, he only comes at the end of the movie to warn Jason that he already gone too far. And I don't know, I would figure that God would at least try to send some sort of, like, I don't know, a tip or a sign. I know there's a whole thing about God's not supposed to help out directly, and, there's a little stuff about that, but still, it does seem like he was, if you had if they had taken away the whole pedophile thing, I think this character would have been a bit sympathetic, actually. A guy who served in the military, he did his time, and he was just, chatting it up with his friends, and that seems perfectly fine up until we see, at least, up until we see that whole thing where he's like checking out Emily, and it's like, nope, don't want any of that. Again, to me, that's where up until that point, he's a pretty sympathetic character, so I don't know. Anyway, again, I do feel like the transition was a bit too drastic, and the execution of, again, because it comes out so late in the movie, like, it's like, okay, this anonymous figure, it could have been something very interesting. It could have been someone who was like, one of the terrorists that managed to like find out. He could have had been there the whole time. That could have been an interesting thing. And him killing his friends, I do think that could have actually stayed in the movie. And he was just going nuts over that. And, he was just the guilt, and that could have been the aspect they could have gone through instead of bringing the whole religion thing into it, because I do feel like that's, again, too separate from what was already happening in the beginning of the movie to what and it ends up turning into. Again, it does feel like two different movies that don't clash very well spun into one movie. And because of that, I'm going to give this movie a 3 out of 10. I don't think it's very good at all, actually. Again, the acting's pretty poor, even from the get-go. And it just sort of... It is a bit slow as well, on top of the whole two different movie kind of vibe going on. And yeah, So that is my review of Anonymous 616. And if you enjoyed my review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out that link in the description. I'll head you over to my Patreon page, and any donations are greatly appreciated. And until next time, everyone, bye bye!